Welcome to our peeps at the Peeb. I'm obviously broadcasting from home. Tonight we welcome a couple guys who are on the SABR baseball cards committee, which I'm not a member of yet, but I think I'm going to join after tonight because this is a very interesting topic. We have a good crowd. Hopefully a few more will join. Just to let you know, administratively, the only thing coming up for the Baltimore Babe Ruth chapter is, since it's already May, by the end of June, if you have articles for the next issue of our newsletter, please get them in. It should be a little bit larger because we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary since our chapter's founding in June. And likely our summer outing to Camden Yards, for those who are local to the Baltimore area, will be in August this year versus September, because the biggest opponents of the year, the Dodgers and the Yankees, come in September, and those prices will be a little bit off the charts. So thank you all for joining. I will mute myself, and I'm going to turn it over to our two other co-hosts this evening who will introduce themselves and let you know all about the topic. For questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them as we can, and then we'll have a Q&A hopefully at the end as well. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you, Peter. I'll step in. I'm Matthew, and I have been writing about baseball history for some time, primarily through a baseball card lens, and I am a member of the Baseball Cards Committee within SABR. And that's my great pleasure tonight to bring two things together that are so important to me. You've got a figure at the level of Babe Ruth that no one can ignore, and then you have within that, you have all of the 150 plus years of baseball cards, of which now the Babe is an ever-growing part of as time passes. We wanted to talk with people here who know his origins best and give you a sense of what did he look like within the baseball card universe. And tonight's guest, Brian Kappel, has written about the first set that came out just after Babe Ruth passed. And we think it has a lot to say, not just about the company, not just about the Babe himself, but then about what came since then. It's been now, 80-ish years since that. And we'd like to hear more from you, what kind of topics interest you based on what we're able to share. You've got 4 different things referenced here on my screen. You've got Brian's site himself. He's an author, he's a designer, and you can find a lot more information about him there. You have the SABR Baseball Cards blog, covers all types of topics, including this in different ways in the past. And you have the way that SABR is available on Instagram and Blue Sky, which is perhaps how you found this event today. So I will start by sharing let's see, let me get this open for you. I'm going to share out a few pictures of what I call the Ruthian career cards. And Ruth, I think everybody here knows, started in 1914 in Baltimore. This one is going to go from 1914 all the way up until the year of his death, 1948. And then he's got the professional teams that he was connected to as a player listed out there. Those are where you can find me. I write for the number 5 type collection. I've got a Blue Sky account as well. Ruth started there at age 19 with the Baltimore's International League team, the Orioles. There is a lovely set, really, for its time. The red and the blue, I think, really stand out well. It's quite an interesting photo of him, whether or not he was ever successful. I love the look of the spring sweaters that they wore back then. But you've got a very rare, very valuable set that he appears in first. You've got the Federal League team, the Terrapins. You've got his own Orioles. And if you were to find one of these, you can pretty much shut down the rest of your collection and just tell people, I got the Babe Ruth Baltimore news card, and you can stop there. As his fame grew from his time as an ace and a budding slugger with the Red Sox, when he joined the Yankees, the teams there trying to understand better, or the companies trying to understand better what to do and how to put them on cardboard, most of them, all they had were the Red Sox photos. So of the time, they took those Red Sox photos and then they artistically tweaked them or did other things to make them look like a Yankee. That first photo is from what we call the W514. Lovely shot, lovely pose of, again, young Ruth swinging the bat. As the home run king and labeled as the Yankees, it's got to be from 1920 or later. Similar story with the second card there that shows him as a pitcher. He really gave up pitching regularly when he came to the Yankees. So the next card from the same company did that artistic tweak on the right. They put him there with a bat in his hand. They unfortunately made him a righty. That was something you could tell they did for efficiency. They had the photo, they wanted something else that showed him as a hitter, and there you go. Fast forward a few years, and you've got Ruth's own business interests that grew and grew and grew. He appeared on screen, he appeared in print, whether ghostwritten or under his own words. He debuted his own Ruth's Home Run Candy Bar. There is a significant legal case here where the Curtis Company had already put out the Baby Ruth, which they claimed did not have direct connection to Babe Ruth. But then they successfully blocked Ruth's home run bar from being out there because they said it was causing confusion in the market. It's a heck of a legal story and a twist on what you think marketing should probably be. I encourage you to go look for the cards, if nothing else. You've got two cards that show him from one of his early movie appearances. You've got great pieces of history that I think a lot of people would have a hard time finding individually. So it's great that the internet is here to provide them for us. Getting closer and closer to the cards that people do know well with Ruth's face on them. Right at the end of 1933, the Gowdy Gum Company put out a multi-sport set. You've got bicyclists, you've got one of the dog sled drivers who inspired the Iditarod, and you have two baseball players fit into those 24 cards they released in late 1933, Ruth and Cobb, really the titans of the sport. And there's no mystery why they chose those two guys. I think part of the rush job shows that they wrote on the back that he'd had 42 World Series home runs by that point, which that would be amazing. It was hits, but hey, if you're going to give anybody 42 World Series home runs, I hope it's Babe Ruth. His last active card, 1935, he played about a month and a half for the Braves. He did manage to hit a few home runs. It was pretty clear to anybody who I think was paying attention on the field that he was nowhere near the man that he wanted to be. And since he'd taken this job in part to find a future in baseball as a manager and other significant roles, when it turned out that that's not what the Braves had in mind, he decided to hang it up. Still, though, great card here, 4 great names, even if Ruth is the one that dominates what you see. The last year that he was alive, 1948, the Swell Gum Company, or Swell Gum product line run by the Philadelphia Gum Company, put out a pair of sets that feature Ruth. One, you've got a highlight from World Series. There he is with Gehrig finishing a home run trot. And then you have him just, honestly, while he's a shadow of his former self, there's no chance you're going to miss that that's Babe Ruth there. He happens to be talking with William Bendix in Yankee uniform, who's there shooting scenes portraying Ruth. Ruth lived just long enough to see the movie premiere. And I think that makes a great capper. And it's a great thing to see that it was captured on cardboard, because I think for a lot of people who'd traced Ruth's life, they just know that he had his wonderful final appearance at Yankee Stadium, and they don't know a lot more. But there really is a depth of character that's available there for Ruth's face, for Ruth's story, that if you go looking for it, it's there to discover. He has the same impact on baseball, I think, memory today that he has ever had. For people who play the Immaculate Grid at immaculategrid.com, you may remember that on April Fool's Day, they played a 9-spot grid where you could just pick any player at all. All you had to do was type in any random name. You'd see a bunch of players. You could pick any 9 guys from history to fit in here. And Ruth was the most popular choice for every single spot. With that kind of context, seeing the cards that existed during Ruth's life, seeing what kind of legacy we're thinking of here, I am happy to introduce Brian here, who has written a book that doesn't just connect to Ruth, but it connects to where companies that were really trying to make a name for themselves in the baseball world, in the post-war world, saw someone like the end of Ruth's life as being significant to them and seeing their opportunity. So Brian Kappel, who is the author of Relief that we've referenced already, please take it over from here and let me know if you need any help on the hosting of your slides.
Yeah, let me actually, if you wouldn't mind pulling them up, Matthew, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to do that. They'll be up in just a moment.
Perfect. Yeah, the book that I wrote was about the 1948 through 49 Leaf issues. So that covers everything from the Pirates to boxing to football to baseball. And when I first started writing the book, the thing that I kind of ran up against was the notions in the industry that had kind of become almost like folklore. And so what I did was kind of take a deep dive into the company itself to just kind of get the background tech, basically the understanding of the history of the company, which led them to the point where they started producing the cards. And so the how Babe Ruth kind of fits into that whole scenario, I just kind of want to give you a quick snapshot of kind of what I cover in the book in its entirety, which is really about a company based out of Chicago, starts in 1920, and it is they are solely a candy company. But what's interesting about it is that they go through in kind of like a P.T. Barnum slash Ray Kroc kind of way, started producing cards under subsidiary companies that they would push out to market just because they knew that kids would buy their candy, their gum, with the added enticement of having baseball players along with them. So you see like issues like the Dietz gum cards as well as the Overland cards were all subsidiaries of Leaf, but everything kind of comes back around and kind of builds on 1948 kind of being the start of when Leaf actually started producing cards and putting them out there. And anyone who's familiar with the cards, they're actually the same size as the 1933 Gaudi cards, which is kind of interesting. They did.
Brian, on that note, this is something that was common throughout the 30s, since you mentioned that connection. Gaudi had a number of other names that they've used early days, and for tops, they had other names that they used. It seems to be something hardly exceptional for Leaf.
Right. And I think that's essentially a reason why they did a lot of the things that they did was, there was nothing new or innovative in anything they were doing. Solomon Leaf, who was the owner of the company, liked the cards, was not much of a baseball fan, even though he lived just down the street from Wrigley Field. He liked the cards because it helped with basically the gum wouldn't break with the cardboard backing. So he was all about the baseball cards to kind of keep the integrity of his product, being the candy, in place. So this timeline kind of encapsulates everything that I kind of cover in the book, which starts in 1948. The Pirate, as in swashbuckler, set was released first, and that's when you kind of got into the habits of Leaf changing their cards midstream and kind of starting with a set that was unnumbered. And I have a feeling that the salesman came back and said, if you put numbers on the back of the cards, kids will chase the entire set. And Leaf being Leaf, they said, well, if we skip number the cards and don't actually put numbers with an actual number of the cards produced, they'll never get a complete set and they'll keep on buying the cards. So that's something that they actually ran all the way through. Only the 1948 Leaf football set is the only one that's true numbered from 1 to 98. Each of
And Babe Ruth's number?
Babe Ruth's number is number 3.
All right. So they knew what they were doing at least a little bit.
They did. And so the timeline shows where Ruth's passing kind of falls in their timeline. The big misconception of the Leaf set when I first kind of jumped into it was that it was a 1948 issue. The problem with that is that cards such as Ruth's have a copyright of 1949 on the back of it. Now, when you take when the babe died, which is August, and then you start taking these other elements as well as what's written on the back of the baseball cards, there's essentially no way that a candy company going into the Christmas season would focus solely on putting out a baseball set. And so through the research that I did, I was actually able to find in the lawsuit from Bauman to Leaf, the actual release date of the cards was March of 1949, which falls in line of why they would have taken Babe's passing and made it kind of a tentpole moment in the card set itself, where it was, they were pushing not only the fact that we're going to reserve the number 3 card of the set for Babe, but they also did it in, I think the next slide, Matthew, is okay, so this is we'll get to, it's actually on the next slide, but one of the internal documents that goes back and forth with the Leaf set basically say, not only is the cards out there in 49, but they also use Babe as kind of like a marketing feature, that there's a premium that comes in every single box at the bottom of that. I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
One of the things I did turn up in the actual research for the Leaf says that there was an early and a late printing, something that the baseball card industry really doesn't recognize, albeit except for one card. There's three variations that the baseball card industry accepts in the Leaf baseball issue, and that being the Gene Hermansky era, the Cliff Aberson era, and then the Kent Peterson. And there's a black cap and a red cap. But what actually happened was somewhere along the line, be it either because of a warehouse fire or something that kind of happened in between, there was an actual change, physical change to the plate, the printing plates. In some cases, like Stan Musial, like the Kent Peterson, like Jackie Robinson, they removed all the details from the baseball hats, essentially making them brighter. But then they also added additional elements to them in where, as you can see on the example on the left, the Babe's uniform kind of bleeds into the border that goes around the card. They actually physically went in and put in color bars to close it off. And
So,
so that represents a second printing, a late printing of those cards that are
Mhm.
at a smaller quantity that are still out there. And so the industry hasn't quite come around on that yet, but they actually exist. It's an actual physical change to the printing plate, and in a
Mhm.
four color process, it presents as that for the Babe card in that set.
So how much of this, the physical process, can you talk through us here? Because I
Yeah, so
think that as a shopper, you get to a stage where you can easily imagine someone going to the candy store. They pay a penny, they pay whatever they pay, they unwrap it. They're excited to see someone that they like. They're not as excited to see someone that they don't like. What is it that gets up to that point, the logistics and the printing and the so on?
what's interesting and what I found is I went to the Chicago Historical Museum or Chicago History Museum and was able to find the effects of Marshall Leaf, who was the son of Solomon. And he had a bunch of images from the early 50s, late 40s that showed the actual process of how everything was essentially in-house. And so unlike a lot of other cards of the era and before, where it kind of falls in that ephemera type application of really kind of a high tech 7 to 21 color type process. Leafs was very basic. Leafs was more closer akin to an Andy Warhol print because it was a four color process. It was black, red, blue, and then yellow, and then basically the half tones that you would create to get your greens and oranges. And so they were very, very basic because essentially what they were doing is they were running it on the same presses that they were using to create the boxes that they were putting the candy in. And so in the book, I kind of go into the whole process because my great uncle was working on a printing press at that time, was able to walk me through it. And when I showed him the leaf cards, I said, what do you think, Uncle Lester? These are the cards they produced. And he goes, well, these guys definitely weren't producing any Van Goghs. I said, okay, that's fair. I said, so were they skilled, printers? And he goes, it would be like bringing the space shuttle to your corner mechanic. And so he's like, yeah, these guys were kind of all over the place. And so anyone who knows anything about the Leaf set, they're wrought with being off center, off registration, colors going in, colors coming out, things spun around, upside down, all that kind of stuff. Because essentially, as far as I could tell, it was probably the swing shift guys who had basically reset the printing press and were running them overnight and just running through as many as possible because they would basically have to reset the colors. And if it was only a one color press that they were running it one set at a time, they would run all of the reds at one time, everything would dry, stack it up, set it back up, send it back through. And so that's why you had those registration issues. And then you would send it over to get cut, and they were just cutting them as fast as they possibly could. And so that's why you have miscuts and you have all kinds of things that I think turn a lot of people off to the Leaf set, but I think also kind of makes it endearing when you can kind of decode actually what's going on in there.
Mhm. And if I can reflect, it makes more sense, I think, to use the photo of Ruth that they did if you think about Ruth having passed away. They have a number of photos that they've used in there. If you go through a gallery of this online, where you'll see people are having a great time. A lot of smiling guys. They weren't using the worst possible photos of players. But if they did have in mind that Ruth had passed, you could see why they might take such a serious look at someone versus someone where there are so many pictures of Ruth smiling that you have a tougher time, I think, of finding someone with one with a serious face like this.
And it kind of leads into the next slide, which is the fact that they use the exact same image on the premiums that also came with it. So it became a selling feature that not only was he featured in the set itself, but this is one of the pieces of evidence that was actually in that lawsuit that I talked about earlier. And you can see that the number one sales feature that they have is that Babe Ruth's picture is free to the person who buys the last pack that's in the set. And so they came in an envelope in the bottom of the boxes, and they had these premiums. Now, in the premium set, there's 8 players, but there's 3 versions of Babe Ruth. And so it's interesting because they actually call it out as a two-color print. Oh, it's two-color print. Yeah. Babe is the only one that had a two-color print.
Mhm. Well,
Everything else was just black and white, and what they had drafted off of was assets that they were creating internally for actually their spearmint gum. And so they called them the Leaf Beauties, and it was basically pictures of young ladies who are chewing on the gum, but the look of the premiums is almost exactly like the Leaf Beauties.
okay. Sounds like the Doublemint twins to me for people
Yeah,
who
exactly. Kind of
are
before
history.
their time. Yeah, they hadn't found the second twin, so it's just one gal. But if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
I've got the pictures of the actual premiums themselves, and they use that same image of Ruth.
Can I
And
pick out a few things on this first to make sure that I've
yeah,
got the
yeah.
right picture? So this, the excerpt that you have here, this is an advertisement to other people in the industry.
This is
Jobbers,
internal
as they
sales.
say, people who did the stocking, people who did the shipping, people who did the promoting. Is that right?
Yeah, so this was an internal sales document, and I think it was probably also pushed out to shopkeepers as well, because
Hmm.
I think that it does kind of give talking points. Um, Number 3 is the one that I think is most endearing, is the fact that they were going up against Bauman at the time, who had a smaller card. And in that third bullet point that they kind of hit, they say full lagging size cards. So,
Hmm.
encouraging the kids to do the low level gambling of lagging their cards and throwing
Yeah.
them.
Well, so explain lagging. I knew I didn't come across that, I think, until I got your book.
Yeah, so lagging was basically, or the lagging that I did, was the idea that you and your buddy would flip your cards up against the wall, and whoever would stand their card up against the wall upright would actually win all the rest of the cards. And so that's how, again, one of those little games that as we're all kids, we kind of create and stuff like that. But they were leaning in on that their cards, basically bashing the Bauman cards, but not bashing them directly, and just kind of saying, "Oh, well, we've got bigger cards and we got better cards. We've got the premiums that are in the boxes." And then they have the sports writers complete 1949 histories of all the players, which is funny because it was going into the 49 season, so it was actually the 48. So their timelines
Mm-hmm.
were all off. But this document was one of the things that was cited by the Bauman Company of the lawsuit against Leaf to essentially shut them down in 1949.
And so that's a competitive move. Bauman's established in their own mind. They released a set in 1948. They think they have the right to do production of baseball trading cards, and they're taking Leaf directly to court to say, you guys may have created cards, you may have put them in packages, you may have marketing, but that doesn't mean that you can enter the market the way that we've already entered the market.
Well, and they also had the fact that they had signed something like 172 players to contract.
Mm.
So back to the issue of, Leaf essentially, Solomon Leaf essentially said that he didn't feel any need to go out and actually pay a player to kind of go through and to use their likeness. He felt that because they're celebrities, because they're ball players, he was just going to use their likeness anyway. So that became one of the cornerstones that basically the judge accepted throughout, and accepted that they didn't have the right to use uh basically the images of the players, because they had no monetary contract in place to use their images.
Okay, so this hinges on far more than one individual player, whether it was Ruth Estate or something else, being into it or not into it. This was more a real, let's see, a real intellectual point that plays out in the marketplace. Is this the kind of thing that you need to do? If someone's popular, if someone's visible, can you just print whatever you want to print? Versus, no, you really have to sign them up and you have to let them know what you're signing them to, and they have to say this is okay by me, and they get compensated by some amount. All right, I will go ahead. I think you've referenced this one a couple times. Can
Yeah,
you
so
tell us more about the premiums?
yeah, so these are the premiums that actually showed up in those envelopes in the bottom of the pack. So the idea was the kid who bought the last pack, or I think there was something that was also written, if you brought 5 wrappers back to the shop that you bought your packs from, that you could get the envelope at the bottom. And in the envelope were these 5x7s printed essentially just on paper, like a light paper stock. That's what the kids would get. And so these have survived. They're crazy hard to find. Of course, the Babe Ruth and the Lou Gehrig are easy to find, or easier than the others. Walter Johnson, Christy Matheson, also easier to find. And then you get into the last four of John McGraw, Mickey Cochran, um, I'm trying to Grover Alexander, and I can't remember the last one. Sorry. Anyway, it's in the book. Those are exceptionally hard to find because they didn't have the name kind of recognition that a Babe Ruth would have, and so that's why so many of the Babes have survived kind of through the years. But the one on the all the way on the right, that's the typical look. That's the one where it says Baseball Immortals. That's what all the rest of the premiums look like. The other two on the left or left in the center are really kind of the outliers. They're the ones that they made it out, but there's no other premium that looked like those.
So I went back one just to confirm. So this may align with, it's saying specifically, this is Babe Ruth's picture that you find in the bottom of the last package. That could be when it stood alone, and then at some stage they thought, actually, let's do this for a bunch of people. Perhaps people will get tired of buying out Babe Ruth, at the bottom of every box.
So what's interesting is that number two is actually, it references great premiums, but they say it's a two-color premium of other players. So
Mm,
again, this whole document, because again, the baseball set itself was 98 cards. That's
hmm
all it was. So the fact that this is publicizing over 300 major league stars, yeah,
mm,
they never did that. They never made there. So
hmm
it was only 98 cards and it was numbered to 168. But again, Leaf
hmm
being Leaf, they never produced the other 70 cards.
hmm Mark asked in the chat while we're looking at this one about, he said is it 3 cents a pack wholesale? 72 cents divided by 24
Yeah,
packs.
because I believe it was 5 cents. Yeah, it's right on the front of the box there. The
Okay.
packs themselves were actually 5 cents each. Yeah.
Okay. So you knew right away if you were getting into it, that's what your margin was that you were getting.
Yep.
Okay. Uh, all right. Is there more you'd like to say about the premiums?
I think that's about it. It's just again, it's a fascinating story as I kind of dug into everything that seeing what the company itself was doing in real time as they were producing the candy and how this kind of fit into that whole puzzle.
Okay.
That's it.
hmm Uh, well, in addition to what Mark's already asked, I'll observe that, I mean, for all the time that I've spent looking at cards within this baseball lens, I knew a lot of stories about Ruth's aspirations to do things with all of his baseball experience, to be an executive, to be a manager, to be a something, and that there were times when he did do some type of coaching or some type of marketing roles. Were there things you learned about Ruth himself that connected to this story while you're doing the book research? Even if he passed away right around the time that it came out.
Yeah, I'd say the most interesting one that I've come across is just in talking with other card collectors who are, working on Leaf sets or trying to collect or amass Leaf collections. One guy in particular is trying to collect all 98 of the cards signed by the players who show up on the cards, and the one that he's chasing is the Ruth, because there's one in the PSA registration, their DNA that had been certified as an autograph card. Now, again, with everything that I just presented, there's no way that Babe Ruth signed a card that came
Mm-hmm.
out in 1949.
Of
Even
course.
if it was something that was produced as a salesman sample in 48, he wasn't signing it. So
Mm-hmm.
this falls into the category of Ruth's wife actually was known to sign a lot of his autographs. In fact, that's personified by the fact that there's a 1962 card that is certified by PSA as a Ruth
Mm-hmm.
signature. But we all know that didn't happen either. So
Would have had to be her, would have had to be someone else.
yeah.
So can you say a little bit about that part? What was the and I can imagine that they didn't take autographs quite as seriously if you've got the needs as they see it as a young fan to be a little bit happier. We'll make sure that this thing that they sent in gets signed somehow.
Right.
Uh, yeah, what is it we should expect when we're thinking about that era? How would they have done those things?
Well, I think a lot of it, a lot of the collections that I've seen, a lot of the collections that have come to market recently, kind
Mm.
of fall into the category of a more cordial time where people would actually put pen to paper and send cards off to the actual person to have them signed,
Mhm.
and they were actually returned. You know, so I think that this still sits very much in that era when, like I said, the pen and paper written letter to someone asking for an autograph, I'm a big fan, and then getting those cards back. I think that almost to me would make that much more special that way because you know where that basically has to travel in order to kind of get back to the kid's hands who initially sent it off.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, Tony asked here in chat, are you aware of 49 leaf salesman sample cards since you just mentioned them? Anything,
So
and would they be similar to some of the others from the 30s that they were specifically stamped or otherwise designated?
it's interesting. This falls into the category of one of my theories that I have yet to be able to kind of validate. I do believe there are salesman samples out there, and there's a well, there's a chance that Ruth could have been one of those salesman samples, but at the same time, I'm going to actually back up and say no. Um,
No
it,
on the Ruth or no on the samples?
well, no on the Ruth because I know that there were samples. I know for a fact there were samples because there's two versions of Hal Newhouser. There's the version that's in the short print set, and it has the exact same back as another card that floated out there, and it looks entirely different on the front. And so I think, you know, and there's the Rocky Graziano, and there's also a Joe Louis with a blue back.
Hmm.
Those are such departures from what actually happened out there. You know, Graziano is a whole thing on its own because there was all kinds of issues in 48.
Hmm.
And essentially, I think, you know, everyone calls that the 50th card, but there's no way in the process that they printed the cards to have a
Hmm.
50th card because they had it
So,
set up as basically seven across, seven down, 49 cards, four up per sheet. So there was
mhm.
no adding just one card. But I think that what they did was because, again, you know, as a candy company, they would send their reps out, they would sell the candy. I think that they would arm them with cards as they went
Mhm.
out. And I think that what those kind of first issues were, uh, I think that you know the ones that kind of are the outliers that are totally different from what everything looked like. I have a
Mhm.
feeling that a lot of the cards looked exactly the same. What they did was they just kept the images the same. So if there was a Sid Luckman that was in that salesman sample, it's the
Mhm.
exact same Sid Luckman that's out there now. So if there are any that are still in existence, they would look exactly like the ones that are basically in circulation right now. But like the blue back Joe Louis, the Graziano, the Newhouser, I think those are the ones that are basically kind of tipped the hand that there was a salesman set out there. Uh,
Mhm.
I just think that the rest of the cards that came out probably look exactly like what went into the packs and were actually in market.
So to break out those, because we're looking at 48 being these two plus different sets, you've got your pirate set, you've got your football set, you've got your late year boxing set. Lewis, boxer, Luckman, football player. Anything to know about the pirate set in terms of total composition and how it compares to the others?
Yeah, so the Pirate set is my current obsession right now.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating set. It's visually kind of shocking because again, produced the same way, four color press, everything like that. They went a little crazy with the half tones on that one, and I don't know where they got the artwork from. The backs are laughable. I mean, just going into full the fact that they were intended to go to pirate or
In what they were writing, they're like all text backs, but
yeah,
what
they're
they're
all
describing
text
the
backs,
text.
but as far as like what they were covering, like you know, one of the guys, was a vicious pirate, came back from being a pirate and found that his wife had killed their son by drowning, later hanged herself, and then he went crazy, and that's all written on the back, and it's like, wow, that's what's going off to my kid, fantastic, you know, so they're kind of an odd set anyway, which you know, of course, makes me love it. But the interesting part that they kind of play in the entire story is I think they came out first because as I was purchasing them for my private collection, I found that a bunch of the cards were coming in without numbers on them. So again, this going back to this whole idea of I think they pushed the first set of pirate cards out there and realized that there was more money to be made by putting the numbers on them, and then even more money to be made by skip numbering them, which then was carried out through the rest of the sets going forward.
Hmm. So, and I'll reflect that's something that I had seen in previous decades. It is common enough to find things, whether by the Gaudi company, by others from even earlier than the 30s and 20s, probably, create the perception of something that's there, even if it's not there. Kind of overpromise that if you're starting to invest in these cards now, there's going to be even a lot more than you see here. And then significantly underdeliver, believing that the kids will believe you when you said there were all these other cards to go find, and that it extended far enough where friends would pass along rumors that their friends of friends of friends had found these cards, across town, and it was just your bad luck that you hadn't seen them yet. So
Right.
skip numbering fills that, right? That mental space is there, and you keep going after the gum and the cards, thinking that at some point you're finally going to fill those in.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they distributed the Leaf cards because, again, the initial offering was 49 cards, which were pushed to the East Coast, started in Boston, kind of worked their way down, Great Lakes, everything like that. When the lawsuit hit, they were, I think, in that mode of just liquidate everything we have. And so that's why you have those short print sets that made it out there, but really didn't hit the mainstream card industry until the mid 70s. I had, talked with Dr. James Beckett, and he said, he was buying in the 70s, and there were whispers of another set within that 49 offering. And it wasn't until the 70s that they actually started showing up. And that's when you saw the Newhousers, the Satchel Pages, the Larry Dobies, all those cards that were in that short print set that now knowing everything as far as the timing of the lawsuit and what was going on in that lawsuit, that at one point, Bauman was looking for Leaf to basically pay for all the players and dole out, thousands and thousands of dollars to make compensation for bashing their cards. I think they got to a point where they were just like, all right, we got an injunction hit against our distributors out of Philadelphia, which was, home turf for Bauman. So basically their East Coast distribution got shut down. So they pushed everything else that they had stock wise out into the Great Lakes areas. And I think that's where you kind of saw the major kind of dumping, not in the top sense in the Hudson Bay, but dumping the cards kind of in the Great Lakes region. And that's why they were, pretty much mired to shoeboxes and closets for years and years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have the advantage that if you're in the Great Lakes region, you can ship some of those to Canada if what you're really trying to do is avoid enforcement on the US side.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're through, again, being a collector and also, doing the writing and everything like that. A lot of the cards, I wouldn't say a lot, but there have been a substantial amount of cards that have come out of Canada. Because I think that, to your point, I think that they knew that was a safe place to kind of stow some things.
Well, I'm glad we've solved all of our trade issues with Canada in the years since then.
Right.
Uh,
Everything's on the up and up.
that's two questions covered so far. Does anyone like to come off mute and ask? Otherwise, keep dropping them into chat and we'll keep resolving anything.
I have a question.
Fire away.
This is my first society event, so it's nice to see everyone.
Nice.
Brian, so you may have answered this early. I came in a little late. Player, you mentioned Chrissy Mathewson had a card. I'm assuming that was a Hall of Fame premium type
Yep.
deal in the set. Was he as and you said he wasn't as prominent a figure. How well known was he still at this time, as opposed to someone like larger than life, like Babe Ruth? Like where did that measure up?
I think that you saw a tiering in there. Their picks for the premiums are kind of Ed Walsh. That was the last one. There it was hanging out there. I think that it's interesting because they had, the Gehrig and the Ruth. I think those kind of sit on a different level. I think Walter Johnson and Matheson, there's still enough people who knew of them that I think that they were still relevant. But I think when you get down into the Walsh, Alexander, McGraw, I just don't know that those guys had the same draw as everyone else because again, Walter Johnson, Christy Matheson, I gotta believe that they still had some name recognition, probably more so than a John McGraw or Ed Walsh.
Follow-up question, if you don't mind, and I'm going to read your book. So after this, seems to me there are different markets. Like the kids buying these might be more interested in the modern players. And Christy Mathewson, who played in the early 20th century, those types generational. Was that did you learn about their marketing plans and how were they targeting different generations that way?
I think what they were trying to do, candidly, was cast the biggest net that they could cast in order to push the product. Because, it's interesting when you look at the composition of the set, it's this great kind of, you know, crossroads of baseball history. When you have a aged John Wagner, Honus Wagner, at that time manager of the Pirates, but then you also have the Babe Ruth in there, and then you have Jackie Robinson, and then you have, Joe DiMaggio. And so it's like, I think what they were trying to do was trying to cast as big of a net as they could with the names that they could get images of and put in there, and then push the cards from there. So I don't know that they were necessarily trying to target anyone. Knowing what I know about them as businessmen, I think they were probably just pushing to kind of grab every single penny and nickel out of any kid's hand who was looking for a stick of gum that they could possibly get. So it's like, the payoff for them was, okay, well, I'm going to get somebody maybe I recognize, but honestly, I think it's one of those things that they were just trying to get anybody and everybody as much as they could to kind of buy the gum.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Tony has added in chat, one of the big ones. What do you think it would take for this long lobby or hobby history of us thinking of this as a 48 set for people to agree this is a 49 set?
So, what's funny about that is, and this was one of the unintentional we'll call it consequences, but I don't want to take any kind of heaviness to that. About what I did was, and I've reached out to PSA. And after talking with not only Dr. James Beckett, but also with Joe Orlando, who used to be with PSA, about just this, I don't know that we're ever going to get a all like wholesale stop of grading them as a 1948 card. I just don't think it's going to happen because there's so many people that have invested in it. And it's what kind of came up probably about 4 or 5, 6 months ago when I had the first conversation with SABR, was that there's this recognition of the fact that, okay, now we've got this Jackie Robinson card that everybody calls a 1948 Jackie Robinson card. It's his rookie card that all of a sudden, essentially, it's not. So did it come out before Bauman? Sure. Did it come out before in 48? No, it didn't. So there's a lot of economics that I think go into this whole thing where I don't think it's going to be. It's interesting. SGC has started putting 48, 49 on their cards, basically on everything they grade. They're acknowledging the span, and I think that's more to do with the copyright than it is to actually do with the distribution of the cards. I'm not sure that it's going to be something that's going to hit the mainstream anytime soon. I would love for the early print, late print to kind of hit, because I think that that's an important part of the story that, again, in my conversations, which I go into in the book with PSA, where I'm basically saying, hey, look, with this Kent Peterson, you guys are already recognizing that a variation exists, but there's 36 more.
And a variation that could only have been printed late in the year as opposed to earlier in the year.
Absolutely, because if you look at the fact that you're removing something from the physically removing something from the printing plate is a true variation. And their default on all the emails back, on all the calls that I had with them, we know about the color variations.
Mm.
The color variations are a whole other story. Again, going back to my great uncle, he said basically, look, this predates Pantone standardized colors by 5 years. And so we're talking about they were getting whatever inks that they had to print the boxes for the candy is what they had on hand. So if the press manager is basically sitting there going, look, I need black, I need red, I need blue, I need yellow, whatever you got. And so, if we're going to have this brilliant royal blue that's going to come on, okay, we're going to throw that on the cards. If it's a lighter kind of periwinkle, okay, we're going to throw that on the cards. Now, when you have halftones, now you take that blue and you put it with a yellow, and now you're going to get this variance of green that's just going to go all across the board. But they were also not the best press operators, because every now and then they would let the keys, which is basically the inkwell, go dry. So you would have cards that would show up that all of a sudden there's a Gerald Pretty card that has a band of green in the back of it. And there's some cards that are out there that have no green in the back. It's because they had let the blue go dry and they kept on running them. So when you see any kind of those errors that kind of come through, it's the absence of what color that causes the variation. And so I think that is what everybody kind of focuses on, because if you look at the actual if you look at how they grade the football cards, they go
Mhm.
through and they say, oh, well, that's a white background variation. It's like, well, it's not a variation. It's because they let the yellow run dry and there's no yellow back there. So, they do it in the football cards, but they don't do it for the baseball cards.
Mhm. Tony's supplying a bit more information here in the chat for anybody who's live here and online. And the pricing, I'd love for people to understand this broadly, that the pricing is so extreme in terms of year-to-year difference. For people who are looking for the top stars, for people who are looking for what they consider the first available cards of someone, that type of scholarship and interest has become so important to the card hobby and collecting and the economy of it over the past few generations, that being able to change a date by 1 year, it really is a sea change. It's like learning something that is so different about maybe the history of your favorite company that you just had no idea was true before. Turns out that, Steve Jobs loved oranges. What is that a big enough change for you to picture differently about how Apple, is as a company? It's something like that. It's something that completely changes the way people might be interested in one card over another card, or value one thing over another thing. That it really is. It takes a ton of scholarship and almost political support, I'd say, at this stage, for you to make that kind of change.
And Tony, I've never seen a 49 slab. So that's the first time I've ever seen actual 49 on the slab itself. So thank you for sharing that along. And actually, if you look at the chat, what's in there is, I think that's actually a perfect example of, yeah. So the PSA 3 that he's got in there is a early print and the PSA 4 is a late print. And you can see the absence of the detail in the cap, and then you can see the color lines that were added on his left shoulder and right shoulder. So,
Mhm. Yeah, nice. Jeff also asked before that about the gum. Was it bubble gum? Was it a different type of gum? Is there something to say about the gum that Leaf was offering at the time?
yeah, it was bubble gum, and it was immaculately wrapped. It's funny because in going through and trying to, like, when I did the actual cover of the book, I went through and found, packs that had not been opened and tried to kind of emulate knowing the size and the unrolled pack and everything like that. And so everything was hand done. And it's crazy. So the gum was wrapped. It's not like, Tops type thing where it's just the floating stick of gum type thing, but it was actually wrapped itself. So I've got all those pictures in the book, yeah, so not only were the cards wrapped, but also the gum was wrapped.
Amazing. Yeah, a lot of work to make sure that you can tell where they put their priorities as to this is a product we want people to enjoy. We want to make sure it's not stuck to the card.
Yeah.
All right, Austin asked, do different grading companies treat the variations differently?
Not that I've found so far. Like I said, football's a different beast altogether because they actually recognize the color variations. But baseball, kind of across the board, there's no one who calls out any of the differences as, except for the Peterson. Like I said, there's three cards, and the Hermansky. There's a whole theory running around, which I kind of believe, because where the Hermansky card sat on the actual printing plate, it was down at the bottom, and so I believe that the white actually just got the white of the I, the last part of his name got filled in. It wasn't a true error because why would you not only misspell someone's name, but not center it if you were actually making a change? So I think that's more of a printing kind of byproduct. The Aberson was a change that was made early. And as far as I can tell, it was right after the very first printing that they changed that out to basically it goes from a short sleeve to a long sleeve. But then the late prints are true, kind of like a wholesale plate change, and no grading company has yet to recognize any of that I've seen.
Well, I know I must be in the Boston area because when you said the whites of the I did not think of Gene Hermansky ending in I. I thought of Bunker Hill immediately. So to clarify, Gene Hermansky's name ends in I, and that would be where the plate printing would run out because it was at the far right edge. And if it just says Hermansk, that's the difference we're talking.
Yep.
Great. Well, we have, we're running a little lower on time. Brian, I know you brought your own question. We can see it right behind you. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah, so I've got this sign and I've had it for years, and I bought it in the early days of eBay, but I don't know what team it actually is. So it's as far as I could, I thought it was a Wichita Arrows sign, and it's a metal sign. It's screen printed, pretty beat up, but we've had it forever. And in just kind of researching it, I have no idea what team it's from. So if anybody out there knows, please let me know.
Okay. Well, either live or perhaps watching the recording, we'll get just the right answer. That's pretty cool that you found something like that that even someone of your skills has not nailed down.
Haven't been able to find it yet.
Okay. Okay, more questions. We've got another 10 minutes or so. Peter, has anything come up for you or occurred to you in hearing what we've said about Ruth so far that's meaningful to you being there where you are in Baltimore or connected to Baltimore?
No, but knowing a lot about Ruth working at the museum, I do find it interesting. Honestly, I didn't know that some of his autographs appeared after he passed away. I think that's the first I've heard of that. But knowing what I know about Claire and even his daughters, it really doesn't surprise me. So
There's a parallel not long after for the Dodgers, at least. They had a well-known guy who worked as he did everything inside the clubhouse for them. He was a bat boy on the field. They called him the Brow because he had a monobrow. He's well known enough in the hobby now that you can get things authenticated that are authenticated as being signed knowingly by him. So he had this responsibility to handle all of the everything that was in the clubhouse that came in as an autograph request. And if the player wasn't available, he had learned how to sign in the handwriting of all the players. So there are some Brooklyn Dodgers baseballs that are from the Brow, even though you're looking on it and it's every single Dodger of that era who has signed the ball, theoretically.
wow.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll give a meaningful pause here and give an outro for us. If you have any other questions live or in the chat, please add them in the meantime. We're happy, Brian and I are happy to have worked things out and shared some information here for you. We look forward to hearing more if you have any other thoughts or questions that come up afterward, or for those of you who are watching the recording. In the meantime, please check out his site. Please check out the SABR Baseball Cards blog. There is a deep, deep history here that includes the legal wrangling that we've alluded to a couple of times, but haven't gone into in detail, and that you would, I think, learn a lot from if you have an interest in either the local history of where these companies operated, the broad business competition and the environments that they worked in, what it was like before the war, what it was like after the war, and then all of the big names that are portrayed on the cardboard that you've seen. So encourage you to see those, encourage you to follow those. Brian, is there anything else that you'd like to promote while you're here?
No, just the book is available on Amazon. It's also on my website, which is relief.com or reliefbook.com. Yeah, no, it's I thank you all for being able to come and kind of chat with you and stuff like that. This is a passion project, and I love talking to other people, not only in collecting but also just in baseball in general. It's the golden lining of being able to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, you must have had a great question because no one has put their hand up yet to say exactly what that team that is. So I hope we get closure on that for you.
Right. See what we can do.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. I'm going to hit stop.
All right.